we're in this extraordinary time. You've already sort of brilliantly metabolized, and I would say, sort of created so much original content. But it comes in from your description, at least, from a place of spiritual awakening and spiritual journeying, but it specifically applied to creativity. How do you consider that these ideas can be applied now that we find ourselves in a very particular moment, in a moment of isolation, a moment of anxiety and fear? How do you think that this work and the principles of recovery and the principles of the Artist's Way and your other work apply in this very unique time?
I think actually it's a wonderful window for creativity. Many of us are sort of trapped indoors. We're restless. We're feeling claustrophobic, and we're feeling that events are beyond our control. And what we do have control over is taking the pen to the page and writing 3 pages of how we feel and what we care about. And I think there are many tools in the book of The Artist's Way beyond morning pages, although that's the bedrock tool. And I think as you do those exercises, I'm thinking now particularly of one which is numbering from 1 to 25 and listing 25 things that you love. And you can't actually go on an artist date right now, but you can recall the things that you loved. And as you recall the things that you loved, you gain confidence, and you gain security, and you gain enthusiasm, and you gain, hopefully, a little bit of frivolity. And right now we desperately need frivolity.
There's got to be some frivolity in this.
Yes.
Because we can't get too dour and serious.
Yes.
I want to contribute to this frivolity. I've often been told that frivolity and playfulness are the very things that I need to stop. I looked at, when I was older, I looked at a school report that I had that was like, Russell's got sort of stupid hair. He never stops talking and mucking around. He's never going to get anywhere in life if he continues. Like looking at the report, it was like it was the blueprint for the things that would extract me from poverty, as a matter of fact. So, and frivolity actually has been a key component of that, Julia.
There's another tool I want to mention quickly, which is something called counting coup. And again, I would number from 1 to 25 and then list 25 things you're proud of. And they may not be things that anybody else would be proud of. I was proud of beating up the 6th grade bully who was beating up the girls. So that goes on my counting coup list. And when you have a list of 25 things that you've done that you're proud of, it makes it seem possible. When you do your morning pages, what happens is they'll say something like, wouldn't it be fun to write a musical about Merlin? And you would think, well, yes, if I were musical. And then they'll bring it up again and you'll say, I couldn't do that. And then they'll bring it up again and you'll say, well, maybe I could try. And so what they do is they teach you to be an expanded self.
Yes, I understand what you're saying, and I'm beginning to realize more and more that the way that addiction and the 12 steps functions as a beautiful metaphor for detaching and letting go of who you believe yourself to be. The Artist's Way and the symbol of the artist and creator is a beautiful emblem for anybody, whether you consider yourself to be an artist or creator or not, to fall in love with yourself, as you say, and rediscover a kind of personal awakening. I like that bit where you say, what things would you do if you didn't care what other people think of you? Like, dye your hair, do this, learn how to skateboard and stuff like that. Are these still principles that you practice? Are you still living that way? It seems to me, just from meeting you briefly, that you are.
Well, when I teach, I often ask how many people here feel they have an issue with perfectionism. And the hands go shooting up. And then I say, okay, number from 1 to 10. If I didn't have to do it perfectly, I'd try. If I didn't have to do it perfectly, I'd try. And you discover maybe if you didn't have to do it perfectly, you'd sing.
Yeah.
I've tyrannized myself out of so many things, like because of fear and because of the yoke of perfectionism, like, playing football. I've told myself, like, football, dancing, so many things that I think, you're not allowed to do that, you're not good enough. And because I've been, fortunate to live a life in which there's been some success, I've almost used that to bolster the idea that I'm not allowed to do certain other things. I only want to do things if I'm good at them. I'm only going to do things if I'm approved of for doing them. And it's limiting.
Very limiting. And I think this is where we take a look at our belief system and we discover that we want our initial creativity to measure up to the work of masters. So when I was teaching screenwriting, I said, let's look at some early movies by movie-making greats. And so I had them send me their early films. And when you looked at the early films of, say, George Lucas, you think, oh, George, why not try accounting? Which it turns out he could have later used. But very often we judge our embryonic work against the masterwork of great artists. And I think people sometimes say that artists are a fearless tribe, a small, elite, fearless tribe. And I believe that we are all creative and that the trick is learning to create despite our fear. So you sort of step beyond your fear.
Oh my God. That W.B. Yeats quote, like, each artist must create their own religion. Of course you do. And you've literally done that. You've literally created a sort of a practice, a disciplinary practice to bring about art. I'm interested, Julia, in how you applied these principles to parenting. Can you explain that? I've got a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old, and my wife has just written a book, The Joy Journal, on creative play and creative parenting. She was very influenced by you. How do you repurpose your work for adult creativity into parenting?
Well, I wrote an entire book called The Artist's Way for Parents. And what it does is explain that as we create, our children mimic us. And so there are many tools in the book that talk about things like, don't be afraid of mess. Allow yourself to make a mess. Allow your children to make a mess. Sometimes we want to be creative, but we want it within very narrow confines, not messy. So I had a daughter. I have a daughter, and she grew up watching me do morning pages. And when she turned 17, she came to a creativity camp that I was teaching. And she talked to the people at the camp and realized, oh, I'm going to do morning pages. So my daughter now does morning pages, and she mimics. She does morning pages, does artist dates, goes for walks, and uses the tools that she saw me using. And so I think again, frivolity is a wonderful thing to pass on to our children.
As you have practiced these principles across your life, have you found that that frivolity has become natural and effortless, as I suppose the word frivolity already implies? Or do you still, where are you challenged, Julia? What things do you find difficult still? Do you become frustrated? Are you condemning of your own work? Do you find your relationships challenging? Where do you come up against obstacles and challenges?
Well, when I write, I have to deal with my critic. And I've been dealing with the critic in morning pages and saying thank you for sharing. But as I'm writing a book, what happens is the critic gets sharper. And I call my critic Nigel. And Nigel is a gay British interior decorator. And nothing that I ever do is good enough for Nigel. So I recently wrote this book, and Nigel kept saying, "Oh, Julia, you're repeating yourself," and "Oh, Julia, you're boring," and "Oh, Julia," just really scary negatives. And so I turned the book into my editor, and I said, "Well, here's the book, but I'm not sure it's any good."
Oh.
And he said, "I think you've been listening to Nigel." So I do an exercise when I teach, which is that I have people describe their critic. So I've described Nigel, and then I have them describe a character that I call Rolf. And Rolf is like something out of Game of Thrones. Rolf is powerful, and Rolf confronts Nigel. So I say, "What does your Nigel say?" And then, "What would your Rolf like to say to your Nigel?" And so I give Rolf a chance to be big and strong. I think another thing we should probably talk about is the value of what I call believing mirrors.
Yeah, please.
And a believing mirror is somebody who sees you at your biggest, strongest, most possibly powerful. And I think it's important for us to go through life collecting believing mirrors. People who don't say to us, "Oh, Russell, that's just your ego." They say, "Russell, that's fantastic. Do more." So I think I have a collection of believing mirrors. One I would like to mention, she's in London right now, in hiding from Paris. Her name is Sonia Choquette, and Sonia is a fourth-generation psychic, and she has been valuable to me. I will say to her, "I'm worried about the book," and she'll say, "Julia, I see the book being published." And so I've come to trust my believing mirrors.
When you were a using addict and alcoholic, what kind of relationships did you have then, and how do they pose with these positive and affirming relationships that you're speaking of now? And have you had much issues with like codependency, for example?
I think that morning pages are a radical codependency withdrawal. And a lot of times when we talk about an addiction, we talk about having something removed from us. We're in withdrawal from the drug that we were addicted to or from the person that we were addicted to. And I think it's important with Morning Pages to think of withdrawal a little bit differently, and that is that we are withdrawing our energy that we have misspent on codependent relationships. We're withdrawing our energies back into our own core, where we are able to use them on our own behalf. And I think that when we talk about addiction and creativity, we're talking about anything that gets in the way of your being creative. So if you have a sex and love addiction, you may find yourself saying, "Oh, I wonder if he loves me," instead of saying, "This is how that short story should end." So I think that addiction is well combated by the Artist's Way toolkit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I didn't know your story when I was doing it, and it became sort of evident throughout it that there was just the two things were analogous. But have you found that as you have lived this life, I think about my own recovery. I'm 17 years clean and sober from drugs and alcohol. I work a program as best I can around relationships, and I'm married, and so obviously around sex and also pornography, and I have to be mindful about the way that I eat food. My addiction will manifest itself anywhere, and I was thinking about what's blocking my creativity now, and it's sometimes just inertia, apathy. There's a few things I'm meant to be writing. I've got a script that I'm supposed to be writing for HBO. I've got an Audible book about God that I'm supposed to be writing. And I'm still like when I was a kid. I wait until it's like, oh shit, people need this now. I'm gonna get in trouble. Until I sort of kick off. So for me, it's not like at the moment, it's not like, I'm not hanging around in bars or, I'm not being actively negative. It's more of a sort of an apathy or laziness.
Well, laziness is just another word for fear. And I think there's a very good tool in the back of the Artist's Way called Blasting Through Blocks. And Blasting Through Blocks is the tool that you use when you find yourself stalling, and you list out all of your angers, however irrational they are, and all of your fears connected to the project. So you're writing a book and you're stalled, and you say, "I'm afraid the book won't be any good. I'm afraid the book will be good and nobody will know it. And you list out your resentments, your angers, your fears, and then I would do what I would call calling up one of my believing mirrors and saying, "Here's the laundry list that's blocking me from going forward on this project." And they don't have to fix it, they just have to listen. And when you do Blasting Through Blocks, it moves you forward.